Welcome back to the American Revolution. Lesson 3, Battleground Shift. This is Topic 2, the War at Sea. The terms blockade and privateer are both used here. Once again, a measure that keeps a country from communicating and trading with other nations is a blockade, and privateer is a privately owned ship outfitted with weapons. Okay, think pirate. If you're thinking pirate, yes, it's kind of like what a privateer is. Okay. Hey, moving on. Before reading Scam, let's look at this one. The War at Sea is made up of privateers and an American naval hero. So we're probably going to talk about kind of like pirate people, and maybe one of them's a hero. How about that? Something to keep in mind. We will also look at that's it here. Yeah, fighting in the South is the last topic, and we'll get to that in the next presentation. There's a lot going on there, a lot to unpack. I think we'll wait till the next presentation to go over that. Once again, we're using the during reading strategies. I went over them in detail in section 1, the last section on fighting in the West, but we'll be making connections, interacting with the text, clarifying understanding as we go along. We'll also be using our after reading strategy, summarizing and writing, drawing logical conclusions by using actual questions from the text, and evaluating the reading. What kind of evidence is being used here? Is it objective or bias? Okay, and again, we'll draw our own inferences and we'll draw our own insights when we evaluate. Let's get into this. The War at Sea. What was the result of the War at Sea? I mean, what do the Americans get out of it? What do the British? And how did privateers contribute to the American war effort? So what did they do? I hate this question. Why does conflict develop? And again, how does the conflict end? That's really my question at this point. What brings an end to this war? Okay. This is, again, a rather short section, so we'll get through it pretty quick. And so let's get started. I'm on the first paragraph on page 159, and under the War at Sea. The Revolutionary War also took place at sea. Here, Great Britain's powerful navy enjoyed a major advantage. British vessels formed an effective blockade, keeping ships from entering or leaving American harbors. The blockade limited delivery of supplies and troops to Patriot forces. So what I know, the only other nation on earth at the time that could have challenged the British at sea were the French, or was the French. Okay, so yet another reason to seek French assistance. The French have the only other navy that could really stand toe-to-toe with the British at sea. Continuity here, and if you're not aware of this, this is true. And as you study history, note this insight. Superiority at sea was and continues to be a major characteristic of global empires. Great Britain's navy dominated the seaways for nearly 300 years, and it was a great global power. And today, U.S. naval power makes it a great global power. So a big navy, a big powerful navy controlling the trade routes. There we go, talking about trade again. But trade routes, the major trade routes at sea, it can have a significant impact on a country. I mean, so again, Britain for a very long time, since 1588, was becoming a greater and greater naval power and would be right up until World War II. So something to keep in mind. Next subtopic is privateers. To break the blockade, Congress ordered 13 warships, but only 2 of the ships made it to sea. Several were quickly captured by the British. The American Navy was too weak to operate well. Congress also authorized some 2,000 ships to sail as privateers. A privateer is a privately owned merchant ship outfitted with weapons. The goal of the privateer is to capture enemy merchant ships and cargo. Finding crews for these ships was not difficult. Sailors from the whaling and fishing ports of New England signed on eagerly for the profitable privateering trade. During the war, privateers captured more British ships than the American Navy did. Yeah, so how about that? That's an interesting thing. So what I know, likely many of these privateers were New England merchant sailors and whalers put out of business by the war. How much can you trade if you are blockaded, right? And certainly you held a grudge against the British for blockading you, so why not attack their ships? So this certainly gave them an opportunity to make a payday, no doubt about it. Compare and contrast. Next to the might of the British Navy, these privateers must have seemed like nothing more than a bad case of fleas. I don't know how seriously the British took them. Of course, most of the privateers targeted merchant vessels, not warships. So that's something to keep in mind. And we are on page 160, an American naval hero. The war at sea produced some of the war's great heroes. A daring American naval officer, John Paul Jones, won his first successes raiding British ports near the coast of Great Britain in 1779. Jones's ship, the Bon Richard, met the British warship Serapis. The Bon Richard and the Serapis fought for hours. The British captain asked whether Jones wished for surrender. Jones is said to have answered, "I have not yet begun to fight." Famous words, by the way. In the end, it was the Serapis that surrendered. The naval victory made John Paul, a hero to the Patriots. So, yeah, pretty cool, right? I mean, I think that's a pretty cool deal. So, how about this, right? Personal observation. It's interesting. It's interesting to note that John Paul Jones fought off the coast of England and attacked English ports rather than engage English ships off the American coast. It's like he took the fight to them. He took it to England, and that's a kind of big deal. Question answer. The war at sea resulted in very few strategic victories due to the British superiority at sea. However, privateers like John Paul Jones successfully harassed the British along their own ports in Britain itself. Like the victory over the Serapis, the Americans never had any strategic victories, but did produce victories to help morale. And I kind of think of this fight with the Serapis as almost like George Washington's fight in Trenton and Princeton. It's a surprise attack type stuff from John Paul Jones. And okay, you're not going to defeat the British at sea, but you're going to drive them crazy. You're going to scare them. They don't know where you're going to show up. And this, I think, was John Paul Jones' strategy. He knew he couldn't win straight out, but if he could terrorize the British and get a couple of victories along the way, it would certainly help morale back at home and keep the Americans in the fight. Page 160 shows the epic battle between the Bon Richard and Serapis. It was climactic. It was a dramatic battle that demonstrated American resolve in the war for independence. So it's one of those really good moments for the Americans in the war. And the textbook doesn't really tell you like where John Paul Jones is doing his fighting, but you can see here with these different ships that he was using. You can see the Bon Richard. In fact, you can see the Battle of Flamesborough Head, which is that's where the battle took place. Okay, you can see where it actually took place there. And you can see where John Paul Jones was harassing the British. And you will notice that, yes, he's landing in France or the Netherlands. The Dutch were helping him a little bit. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? You can see his fighting was around England. It wasn't in the United States, which is kind of interesting. Hey, let's do our recall. That's it. That's all there is to this one. Okay, the war at sea included the British forming a rather effective blockade against the Americans along the coast, making it difficult to deliver supplies. Since having a real navy was out of the question, the Americans employed individual privateers to arm and harass the British. John Paul Jones was perhaps the most famous American naval hero. He even defeated the British warship Serapis off the coast of Great Britain. The war at sea resulted in very few strategic victories due to the British superiority at sea. However, privateers like John Paul Jones successfully harassed the British along their own ports in Britain itself. That's a big deal, right? Like the victory over the Serapis, the Americans never had any strategic victories, but did produce victories to help morale. And finally, once again, the bias thing. It would have been interesting to know the impact of the British blockade and how Americans managed to smuggle goods in despite that blockade. I would have liked to know a little bit about that story. I mean, how did Americans get goods if there's this blockade? This indeed happened, but very little attention is paid to it here. I would have liked to hear a bit more about that. Okay. Hey, that wraps up part 2. Part 2 is rather short. There's our source information. Discovering Our Past is the book. A History of the United States. Again, this read-along is created for educational use only. It's a supplemental tool. Should not be sold or purchased in any manner. It's just simply here. I'm going to say it again to make you a better student. Okay. Hey, with that, I'll see you in part 3. Thank you, and have a good day.